soul of the sport, that is actually found in a group of islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
It's only in Hawaii, and not even the South Pacific, only in Hawaii, that you find the actual artifacts that specifically points to the origins of surfing. And when we say artifacts, it's just not physical, but like surfboards. It's the mo'olelos, the histories of it. It's in our chants or our olis. It's on our landscape.
Now that's Tom Puhaku Stone. Now he's a native Hawaiian, and we met him on Oahu sitting outside in probably one of the most beautiful places on earth. Now Tom, he's a lot of things. He's a historian, he's a storyteller, he's a wood carver, and he is also a surfer. And he's also the kind of guy that when he starts talking, all you want to do is just listen.
We are ocean people, number one. And so we have been surfing waves for millennia. It was important that we understand the ocean and how we connect to it. So surfing is just one component of it.
Now life in Hawaii, it is defined by the ocean. And Tom grew up not only living near it, but literally subsisting on it. The ocean, well, it meant everything to him and his family.
Really, the best memory for me was when I lived on the island of Molokai. I happened to have a blind horse that my great uncle would put me on every day and send me to Mo'omomi Beach, spend the whole day by myself on this beach. And towards the end of the day, I have to collect everything my uncle wanted from the ocean, just everything that we needed for food. It is a fairy tale, but it was my fairy tale. It was my life, actually.
So long before river surfing and long before hang 10 and gnarly waves, long before any of that, Hawaiians were here surfing beautiful Hawaiian waters. And this history, it has actually been misinterpreted and misunderstood, starting with the first Europeans who documented surfing in Hawaii.
When King is on Cook's voyage, he writes about something, right? And he writes about the fact is that the Tahitians are sliding across the waves on the stern of a canoe. The uma actually means the stern of a canoe. And it's a specific type of surfboard that's yay big, And that surfboard, the way you ride it is you have to catch a wave, slide up under it, right? And put your hands up like a bird and be able to ride it, just with your body, not using your hands to steer it. Yeah? And that was the trick. And so he misunderstood what he was writing about, right? Because when it was interpreted to him, uma, as the stern of a canoe or the rear end of a canoe, it was not, it was the board.
So it's through boards like the uma that Tom learns about the history of surfing and how it's connected to his home. Now Tom, he actually hand carves traditional Hawaiian surfboards, the kind that his ancestors used for a millennia.
I love surfing contemporary surfboards, but I always take the time to go back to traditional because it reminds me how much better they were. For me, it just keeps me learning. It keeps me learning how to surf. Because I don't really, for me, personally, I don't believe I really know how to surf yet. I'm learning how to surf because it's going back to another era where you actually have to understand wave, water motion, the motion of your board, the weight, how to use everything. It's so dynamic, and I love riding my wood boards.
Now, there were boards for children, for royalty, and for everyday surfers. Each board, it has a unique shape, and each board has a unique purpose. So in other words, each board is a different way of connecting with the ocean. Take the pu'u'a, for example.
it's a pretty big board, but pu'ua is talking about the pu'u, which is a hill, right? And the ua is the raindrops that fall on the hill and they slide down. So we know there's a type of wave, right? It's like a mountain, except it doesn't break like top to bottom. It sort of rolls down itself like that. That's the type of wave the board is constructed for.
The ali'i'a is actually designed for a different way of moving in the water.
It's very thin board, and it's usually made out of ulu or koa. The reason is because those two woods have a lot of flex in them, and they don't break. It bends when you turn it every direction, right? It's always bending with the energy of the wave. So you follow the path of the fish, and the board that's exactly what the board was constructed for.
So surfing as we know it today, paddling out directly to the wave and standing up on it as it curls, is based on the ali'i'a style of surfing. Now, there's also the onini, which is stable and fast and for steep waves.
In the world today, there's only 15 of them, and I made every one of them. Yeah.
So what you're seeing right now is him carving the 16th onini in the world. It's pretty cool, right? So what Tom creates are dazzling pieces of history, and it's difficult work. Because when Tom carves a board, he has to find the perfect wood for that specific board. He leaves an offering to the gods and his ancestors in exchange for the wood. And when he carves, he doesn't use rulers or blueprints. He actually feels his way in the shape of the board. Now, every step of the way, he's patient and attentive. But Tom's journey here wasn't exactly easy. When he was a kid, he desperately wanted a big, shiny, fiberglass, fancy, and modern surfboard.
So as a spoiled kid, you know, in the 20th century, wanting a board, but I want that shiny surfboard, right? And, you know, fiberglass and foam and stuff like that. But it was that my dad, working so hard, always came home and carved away at a surfboard or a piece of wood to make me my surfboard so I could surf. I had my own personal board, but it wasn't the board I wanted, you know? And so he made this board, it was beautiful, and then what happens? I mean, I look at the board, and I go, it doesn't have a fin. So he makes a fin out of wood, puts the fin on, and everything, and I go, I hate it. So he breaks it, burns it, and that was that.
Years later, Tom remade that surfboard, gave his dad a call, and he actually invited him over to see the board.
So it was an opportunity to actually have him come to my house, to show him the board, and for him to be happy about it, and for me to begin my journey, another journey, that took me back to realizing how important our cultural traditions of surfing were.
Now, surfing comes down to connecting to the water in a way that actually seems impossible. And carving these beautiful surfboards is just one way Tom surfs. He's passing on a love of surfing and tradition to his children. He teaches people about the history of Hawaii, and he also stands on a board as it floats on the water. With everything that he does, he connects and he shares.
I don't know if it's my responsibility, but it's my joy. I love doing it. So I just enjoy carving it, but I was part of it, right? Even as a child. And the fact is my father was connected to it, my uncles are connected to it, everybody's connected to it. It's in our, it's hard to say it's who we are, right? We just know. That's why people always ask, oh, did you learn from this? No, it's just in our now. It's who we are. It's people. It's living people, right? We just know. Nothing more to say about that part. It's just who we are. It's here. You know.
From Hawaii, surfing traveled all around the world. It spread to Australia and Southern California, places that really influenced modern surfing culture. It's gone to the Caribbean, Mexico, Brazil, and to places not exactly associated with tropical warm waters, like Great Britain and Ireland, and even Alaska. Now, all these surfers, every river surfer in Germany, every winter surfer on the Great Lakes, everyone who's ever looked at a surfboard and thought, maybe I could stand on water too, well, they've all been influenced by the traditions started in Hawaii. And now that you know just a little bit more about the origins and influence of surfing in Hawaii, there's something else you need to know about Hawaii as well. There's something very special about the physical landscape of Hawaii that makes it perfect for surfing. So, I want you to remember back how waves are formed. A little ripple from the wind that keeps building and building. Well, when those little ripples travel a short distance, they stay pretty small, right? Like on a lake, you can see waves, but they're cute and tiny and they're basically on a lake. But when you get to the ocean, they have a chance to grow bigger and bigger. And the farther they travel, the bigger they're gonna get. So the Atlantic Ocean, pretty big, right? But the Pacific is almost twice as big as the Atlantic Ocean. And the waves have a long distance to travel and to grow.
Waves can travel over thousands of miles or thousands of kilometers. It's really quite incredible. And it wasn't until we had the ability to set up automatic sensors all over the planet where we could track very specific wave signatures that moved from New Zealand to Hawaii up to Alaska.
So you can actually have a wave from off the coast of New Zealand that crashes into California days later. And maybe those waves were kicked up by some storm and they rippled out across the ocean, getting bigger and bigger as they went, linking up with other waves going the same speed, propelled by the wind and gravity and all these forces. And that is until they smash against the coastline, which is thousands of miles from where they started. So it's all pretty incredible. So okay, there's one part of the equation that I do have to explain. So places like Hawaii and California, well, they get really great waves that form far away. That's because of how big the Pacific Ocean is. But there's also a second part. And that's how the wave actually hits the shore. How a wave crashes, where it crashes, it makes a huge difference about where we can surf.
So if you imagine a super gently sloping beach, that's going to cause the waves to get shallower over a really great distance. And you're going to see the waves kind of crumble a little bit more in those particular areas. If you go to the complete opposite extreme, where you have an extremely steep beach face, when the wave is coming in, it's going to sort of crash all of a sudden, all at once. It's just going to topple over itself, and it's going to be, a surfer might call it really smashy or just a really violent wave. And the in-between place where surfers really want to spend their time and energy is when you have a bottom contour that's exactly right so that the wave isn't breaking too slowly, but it's not breaking too quickly.
So as the wave gets closer to shore, the bottom of the ocean starts to drag against the wave, forcing it to actually slow down. And the back of the wave catches up to the slower moving water at the front, causing it to curl over. Until finally, the entire wave, it collapses. Now when that happens too quickly, the wave crashes fast and hard. Too slow, and there won't be much of a wave at all. And that's why Hawaii and Southern California are such great surfing spots, because there's lots of ocean and the perfect slope of the ocean floor. But there are also other places on Earth where the waves aren't just consistent, they're actually huge. Here's Ki'ila again.
Every big wave spot is kind of unique. like Tahiti, for an example, it's an outer reef and it's kind of shaped in like horseshoe, and then it drops off to like really, really deep water. So when you get these like huge swells that come, it goes from deep water and then it hits this really shallow reef really quickly. And so the energy of that creates this like really intense wave. Big waves. Exciting stuff.
So, what is a big wave? Well, first of all big isn't exactly a proper word to describe them. They're actually gigantic. And technically, a big wave is anything over 20 feet tall. But these waves can be 20, 40, 60 feet at the face. And the biggest wave ever surfed was 80 feet tall. Now that's the equivalent of a 6-story building. Now these waves are so big that surfers can't paddle up the face of them in time to ride them. They actually have to get towed by someone out riding a jet ski. Now these big waves, well, they're all over the world. There's Mavericks in California. There's Mulgamore Head in Ireland, Killers in Mexico, and Chupu, the horseshoe wave that Kiala mentioned in Tahiti. And in Hawaii, there's also the famous Pipeline of Oahu. And also Pe'ahi, nicknamed Jaws in Maui. Now Hawaii, with all things in the sport, is where big wave surfing, where it all started. And fittingly, that is where she started as well.
It's funny because when people ask me, oh, like, do you remember your first wave? I'm like, no. My mom was pregnant surfing with me at like 6 months, so like pre-birth, I was already surfing. Does that count? I've always been surfing for as long as I can remember. It's just always been a part of my life.
Now she has been surfing competitively since she was just 8 years old. But it wasn't until she was older that she tried to surf her very first big wave, the horseshoe wave, Chupu in Tahiti. She was, well, let's say she was very, very impressed.
The first time I was like, oh my God, it's like a really big wave. I remember just being really excited. You know, I could feel like all the energy of the swell, and I wanted to go out and watch. And then I was like, oh, I wonder if I'd give it a try. I knew somebody that was coming in, and I was like, hey, can I borrow your board? Like, maybe, how is it out there? Do you think I could do it? And he's like, well, if you break it, you buy it. So I went out there, and I just remember being really nervous. So I went out and towed into 2 really big waves, and I think this is really cool and special, and I want to explore this more.
Well, she makes it sound so fun and exciting, but this is actually how the New York Times described that day. Barrels the size of the Holland Tunnel. And if the Holland Tunnel morphed into a whirling vortex eye of a crystalline blue tornado that happened to be spinning within a few feet of hard razor-sharp coral, well, that sounds scary. But she was hooked. That day in Tahiti, she joined a group of surfers who chase big waves all around the world. They get weather reports, tide charts, tips from fellow surfers, and they crisscross the globe chasing bigger and bigger waves to surf. And all of it just for the sole purpose of chasing a very unique rush of big wave surfing.
Yeah, the feeling when you like drop into or ride out of a really massive wave, it's just such a rush of adrenaline. It's really hard to describe. Certain senses get really heightened, like your sense of sight, your sense of touch, and then the other senses that you don't really need. Like I never smell anything when I drop into a big wave, and I feel like even like your hearing gets kind of muffled. You have this massive wave crashing behind you, and it, to other people, it probably sounds like somebody throwing a Mack truck off a building behind you, but because your other senses are so heightened that it's just kind of muffled, you don't really hear it. Feeling really intense fear, being able to overcome it and then triumph over it is a very intoxicating feeling, and that feeling is why I do it.
Now, big wave surfers, they are serious athletes. And she is 100% committed to her sport. She has to be. Because a few years ago, a bunch of snowboarders and surfers, they got together to see if they could do each other's sport. So, the surfers, all of them, they could snowboard, and they were fine. They understood how to read the mountain and experience the drops and shifts in the terrain. They were used to listening and paying attention to these powerful forces. But the snowboarders, well, actually, they couldn't surf at all. And the reason why? It's because big waves are like mountains. Because they are mountains that are moving and changing. And if you're not listening, and if you're not practically one with the water, you will never succeed. Now, she knew that she wanted to be a big pro wave surfer. And out there on the thrashing, moving mountain, just her and her fiberglass board against a wall of water towering over her head, that's probably the honest and biggest thrill. But to be the best, she'd have to overcome a few unbelievable obstacles. First of all, sometimes those waves can carry her to shore on the ride of her life. Sometimes they crash into her with the weight of every mile they've traveled from an ocean far away. Literally, she's putting her life on the line.
I had a really bad one last year in the PIE Challenge where it was the finals, and I got all of a sudden the biggest set of the day rolls in, and it's like probably like 60 feet on the face, and it's gonna land right on top of me.
Now, at these big wave events, there are extra safety precautions in place. Things like life jackets with CO2 cartridges, which can be activated to help rocket a surfer to the surface. Jet ski patrols the area to get surfers out onto the waves, but they also can tow them out when they're in danger. But on this day, she had fallen in the path of a giant beast of a wave. And she also had none of these precautions left for her.
I realized I was completely out of CO2, so I'm wearing this inflation vest that's completely useless, and I'd also broken my leash. So now I'm not attached to my surfboard. I have no CO2 left in my inflation vest, and I'm just going, oh my God, I'm gonna die. And I got one of the worst probably beatings of my life, and held down underwater for a really long time. And I remember seeing stars underwater and just thinking I'm gonna be I'm gonna be fish food on the bottom of the ocean, and that's gonna be my outro, and that's terrible, but I somehow managed to fight my way back up and get a breath of air and survive it. That situation probably should have killed me, and I thought it was going to, but it didn't, and I was able to survive through it. So it just goes to show you you're so much stronger than you think, and you are capable of handling so much more than you think.
So imagine that. Just doing the thing she loves to do almost killed her. But to be the best big wave surfer in the world, she had to push herself to the limits. She had to brave the whirling vortexes, and then there was another hurdle in her way. Now you might think that the surfing community will be open and welcoming, but unfortunately, she actually found it hard to find a home in the sport she loved.
I was in the closet for most of the time I was on the pro tour. It was killing me, it was slowly killing me, and I just couldn't live that way anymore. It was just too painful, so I just slowly stopped denying it, I stopped lying about it. And I started bringing girlfriends around to events and not introducing them as my best friend. That experience is a lot like, when I was out of CO2 and I'm just getting the life beaten out of me, being held underwater and watching my life flash before my eyes. And then when you finally get up and just get that breath of air in your lungs, that's how it felt.
Now her courage and resolve define what it means to be a big wave surfer. And if you want to ride incredible waves that are dangerous and scary and can hurt you, well, you need to be fearless, right? You can't worry about whether or not there are sharp rocks at the bottom, or if you're going to crash and burn, or whether or not you actually belong on this giant mountain of a wave. Just have to do your best to stay afloat and surf. That's what she did. And ultimately, her determination did pay off. Now remember that first big wave that she ever surfed? Well, she was the first woman to ever surf there. And in 2017 actually, she became the first woman in history to be invited to the Eddie Ako Big Wave Invitational. Now the Eddie is the oldest and it is the most prestigious big wave event in the world. And it's named after the famous Hawaiian surfer Eddie, who rescued over 500 people while working as a lifeguard for Waimea Beach. Now the contest, this only held when the waves are at least 60 feet tall at a minimum. So this is a very, very big deal, especially in Hawaii.
I remember being a little girl and thinking like, oh, but I could never compete in that. And then I got invited, and that was just something that I just never even thought was possible or would happen in my lifetime. And so then when it actually happened, and then it was like I was the woman, like I was the one, that was just like really special moment.
Today, she is inspiring a whole new generation of surfers that are willing to push the limits of fear and what we're capable of, just so that they can surf. And her message to them, well, it is really simple.
I think if I could speak to my young self, it would just be like, don't, just gotta hang in there. I know it's super tough and it feels like you are literally fighting an uphill battle just to exist in the world, but you're gonna find your place and you're gonna inspire so many other people. And, just stick to your guns, because you're gonna do amazing things and have incredible experiences, and it's gonna be great. So you gotta roll with the punches, kid.
Now she does impossible things, and so does Tom and Phil. Everyone that surfs is doing something that we really shouldn't be able to do: stand on water. They ride on it. They give themselves over to this feeling of being on the face of a giant mountain that's bucking and bending and doing everything in its power to make its way to shore. Now you'd say it's impossible if you didn't see it happen with your very own eyes. But there's one more thing to say here. Now, people do incredible things all the time. They climb mountains, they build rockets, they conquer incredible obstacles. But surfing isn't about conquering a wave. It's about riding it and communing with it, about understanding it, and that is what I want to leave you with. Now, all these sun-kissed, laid-back, cool kids on their surfboards, they're participating in something beautiful and old and incredibly connected to the ocean. Now, I think Tom, he says it best.
We are in tune. The wind that passes through tells us something. We can smell different scents on the wind. We can feel the temperatures on the wind. When we go to the ocean, right, it's the same thing. We can see the ocean, the colors, the varied hues of blue, right? It's not only based on the clouds going by, but you can see how waves and moving. You can see how currents are moving. You can just the sand. You can see the sand moving in along the shoreline and how it goes out to sea and things like that. My day starts like that every day. Before the sun rises, I'm here. I stand there, I look there, look out to sea. I feel the wind, the temperature, the smells that bring it, that comes to me. I can smell the ocean, everything. And I prepare for what I'm going to do for the day.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And that's what drives people to go out there and do all kinds of crazy, incredible things. Things like riding a wave on a tiny river and paddling into a churning vortex that's impossibly tall, or dedicating your life to hand carving wooden surfboards. It's that feeling of being completely in tune, completely present, and also of being connected. And it's part of something larger than yourself. So go out there, if you get a chance, put your feet in the water, breathe in the ocean air, and feel the energy wash over you from half a world away. And however you choose to connect with the water, go ahead and catch your own wave. Thank you so much for joining me.